speech in itself. I call the member for Burdekin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I rise to contribute to the cognate debate on the Local Government Councillor Complaints and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2018 Queensland and the Local Government Electoral Implementing Stage 1 of Balcarra and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2018. Mr Deputy Speaker, as a former councillor and Deputy Mayor of Townsville City Council, I've experienced firsthand the issues that surround the complaint process involving councillors, and I certainly support an overhaul of the existing legislation and the policy framework. Certainly as the level of government closest to the people, local government has an integral role in the provision of local government services to our communities, and I want to pay tribute to the overwhelming majority of councillors and mayors across our state who work so hard for their communities. Unfortunately, recent events across Queensland involving councillors and mayors being charged with criminal offences is regrettable, and apart from tarnishing the good work undertaken by the majority of our councils across the state, highlights how broken the current system is regarding the way complaints against councillors in particular are handled. I note that the committee has recommended dealing with the decision-making powers for the Councillor Conduct Tribunal and the Local Government Remuneration Commission, and I certainly hope the Minister will adopt this recommendation. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is no question that a simpler, more streamlined system for making, investigating and determining complaints about councillor conduct in Queensland is required. And can I say, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I support the practical and common sense amendment to be moved by our Shadow Minister for Local Government during consideration in detail. I note the key components of the bill involve establishing the position of an independent assessor and the Office of the Independent Assessor to investigate all complaints and information about councillor conduct and provide sufficient powers to undertake those investigations. And can I stress the importance of ensuring that those appointments to those officers are merit-based and the appointees well qualified for the role. Strengthening offences to support the new councillor complaint system, such as providing protection from reprisal for local government employees who make complaints against councillors. Providing for the Minister to make a uniform code of conduct to set appropriate standards of behaviour for councillors. And can I say, Mr Deputy Speaker, how important it is to set the ground rules of what is acceptable and appropriate conduct for all councillors immediately post-election, and to make sure that they are communicated and understood by all our elected officials at local government level. In a day and age when community has high expectations around the behaviour of our elected officials, I think it is imperative that a clear and concise code of conduct is implemented that leaves no room for error. Reallocating the functions of the current local government remuneration and discipline tribunal and the regional conduct review panels by establishing the new councillor conduct tribunal to hear and determine complaints of councillor misconduct. Mr Deputy Speaker, remuneration for elected officials is always a vexed issue, with each local government setting remuneration levels for their councillors. Of course, this leaves councils open to criticism and allegations of impropriety and is often accompanied by vicious local media campaigns. This bill will also help in dealing with the concerns over the potentially conflicted role of chief executive officers in assessing complaints against their own councillors, one of their employers. Councils are generally well respected by their local communities, and any conduct by councillors that diminishes that trust must be addressed to the fullest extent possible in order to maintain the reputation and confidence that has been built over many years. To this end, we should all look forward to working closely with councils and the LGAQ on proposed reforms to ensure transparency and accountability remains the foundation upon which public confidence is built. While supporting the proposed amendments, the LNP recognises it is highly likely that the new arrangements will still require further refinement following their introduction, and therefore we will seek to monitor progress to gauge the effectiveness of the changes. Mr Deputy Speaker, if I could move on to the Local Government Electoral Implementing Stage 1 of Balcarra and Other Legislation Amendment Bill, which is much more contentious. And can I say at the outset that whilst I support the CCC Balcarra recommendations for local government electoral reform, I am opposed to the prohibited donor laws at a state level, and I note the practical and common sense amendments proposed by the member for Toowoomba South regarding expanding this legislation to incorporate union donations for local and state government elections. The test for the Premier now is, will she accept the advice of the independent CCC chair and undertake an inquiry, first promised in 2015, into state political donations before introducing bans at a state level? Palaszczuk Labor government ignoring the Triple C shows that this bill, as it applies to the state, is purely politically motivated. The inquiry process for the bill has been a farce, with the ECQ not answering questions publicly, and there is no question in my mind that the general public should be outraged at their failure to do so. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's nothing short of blatant hypocrisy for those opposite to ban developer donations and then in the same breath continue to receive union donations with relative impunity. To hide beneath the union umbrella and have these third parties wage campaigns is a disgrace. You may well ask, and there are plenty of people out there asking this very question, how is receiving donations from property developers any different from donations received from unions? Certainly we've all seen in this place on numerous occasions those opposite meeting with union officials at this precinct during parliamentary sittings, and they have the hide to sit here and allege that property developers, if they donate to the LNP, are somehow being given unfettered access to our members with a view to influencing decisions. We have heard time and time again, and ministerial diaries unequivocally show that union officials are meeting regularly with ministers, and yet those opposite have the audacity to come into this place and impose one set of rules on the LNP and a different set of rules on themselves. This bill should be seen for what it is, a blatant attempt to impose restrictions on the LNP whilst at the same time providing protection for the Labor Party in Queensland. The fact that the Electoral Commission of Queensland received an invite to appear at the public hearing but chose not to attend raises serious questions. And this is concerning to the LNP as the agency charged with delivering such a far-reaching change to Queensland's electoral system should be prepared to answer questions about the policy implementation in public. Importantly, neither the Triple C nor the Queensland Law Society were consulted on the drafting of this bill. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Triple C made it clear in their written submission to this bill that it goes beyond the recommendations, and if the government were to consider banning certain donations from state elections, a proper review or inquiry would be ideal. Let me repeat that, Mr Speaker. A proper review or inquiry would be ideal. The inquiry terms of reference did not include state elections. Consequently, the Balcarra report recommendations did not involve any detailed specific consideration of corruption risks in state elections and decision-making. Accordingly, the reforms depart from the scope of the Balcarra report recommendations, and the Balcarra report observed that the Queensland Government may consider it appropriate to also adopt these recommendations at the state government level. However, in saying this, the Triple C did not contemplate that the proposed reforms would be introduced without preliminary review to identify and mitigate corruption risks in state elections and decision-making. A proper public consultation process is highly desirable. It appears that the current timelines provide little opportunity for the committee to engage in a comprehensive consideration of these matters, properly informed by experts and other stakeholders. The chair of the Triple C, Mr Alan McSpiron QC, expanded on this issue in the committee's public hearing and raised concerns about the constitutionality of these laws at a state level when he said, and I quote, "In an ideal world, and my personal view would be, you would ban all donations, but the High Court has said, and the law is, that there needs to be an evidence-based response which is proportional to the threat identified." We said in one line in the early part of our report that the government may wish to consider translating or expanding it to the state sector. We did not mean by that it is an automatic translation. What we meant is that it needs to be considered in that sector, which should be an evidence-gathering exercise, public consultation, sufficient to get a sense of what is really happening in that area. Mr Deputy Speaker, we've heard from a number of speakers during this debate about the difficulties in determining what constitutes a property developer, and one may well ask, is this a deliberate strategy by this government to make this a grey area in order to confuse the public? Certainly I've fielded calls from architects, engineers and accountants expressing concern that they too may be caught up by the definition of what constitutes a close associate. Mr Deputy Speaker, there's a stink emanating from this bill, a stink that will waft around this state and in the course of time become intolerable. Queenslanders will ultimately see this bill for what it is, a blatant attempt by this government to use legislation to cement their position in power, and they have shown here today that they will do whatever it takes to hold government, and that is a dark day indeed for Queensland.
Thank you, Member for
Speaker.
Burdekin, for your contribution. I call the member for